Do you have anything you do before the Sunday teachings? I think last time we didn't do any, but we just do the daily ones. Yeah. The very simple prayers, page 34, this prayer book. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. With my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. My practice of giving and other perfections may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. My practice of giving and other perfections may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. So may all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and I rejoice in the merit of holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of psychic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Sajibugi Duji Meido Dhamri Prali Nide Gyambhade Zange Shindu Mide Bhupagin Do Nanda Ilam Jubayo Iram Gurnamandalagam Niryagayame. Okay, let's just sit quietly to begin for a few minutes. Okay. So I think that these morning teachings on Sundays are quite open-ended. I was given a list of potential topics to speak about that have been suggested by students, so I chose a few from among those. I know last time Venerable Legdon spoke about His Holiness. It's during his birthday celebration. That was appropriate last week. Last time I was here, I spoke uh, about bodhicitta and the relevance in the modern world. So I thought to talk a little bit about mind training this week, Lojong. That was also on that list, and its relevance in relation to bodhicitta. And then there's a couple other subjects also. We have to see how things go with time. I always end up expecting to do more, but then it takes quite a long time. I elaborate a lot on things. So mind training, uh, in some sense, we can say this separation of it into a separate topic uh, is something we see in Tibetan Buddhism. Now it's there in the Indian text too. We even see the term Lo Jong, at least in the Tibetan translation. I'm not sure how it would, Lo would be Buddhi in Sanskrit. Um, but anyway, it's certainly based in the teachings of the Buddha. It's just a matter of it takes the structure of various teachings the Buddha gave and puts them into a cohesive, separate format of what we call mind training. So if you read the Lamrim Chenmo, for example, there's not actually a separate section of the Lamrim called mind training. In some sense, the whole text is the mind training. It says that at the beginning of the Lamrim Chenmo, Great Stages of the Path, it says the two main subdivisions or outlines of the text. It's first inciting one to take the essence of this life by recognizing the opportunity we have as being born as a human being, and then the actual stages of training the mind, how to take the essence of the life. So it's all about training the mind in various ways. That's what Buddhism is about, is training our minds. That's what meditation is about. So sometimes we think of meditation, it's a common conception that meditation is about stilling the mind, which is an important aspect of meditation also, but it's certainly not the only thing. It's not the most important thing either. The main thing is training our minds, which means familiarizing with different ways of thinking that are often contrary to how we usually think, that are more in tune with both the way things actually are and also more likely to lead to a happy outcome. So we have a degree of ability to manipulate the external world to make situations unfold in the way we want, but we're pretty limited in that. But we have a lot more freedom about how we train our mind and how we think about situations. And then with that, then anything can be experienced in a very different way. So at the very least, things that might disturb us can actually be causes for equanimity or even being happy. And at the best, things that even problems in life can actually be a great opportunity for developing spiritually and becoming more mature people. It all depends on how we think about it. And that's going to happen naturally as we train in that way of thinking. But generally speaking, it's understood that mind training is within the Lamrim is related to bodhicitta, the thought of enlightenment, the Mahayana path. It's not that it's not there in non-Mahayana traditions, but it's presented anyway in the context of that because it's a very important practice of a bodhisattva. It's much more practical. So we talk about bodhicitta, this aspiration for highest enlightenment. It's a very lofty ideal, but actually working with day-to-day situations and transforming our minds. That's the practice of a bodhisattva. So it's not so much about what we're doing, although of course we want to use our lives in a good way, the right livelihood, and trying to find a way to benefit others. But it's mainly about how we approach the situation. And then whatever we're doing can be an opportunity for practice and an opportunity to benefit others. So, in some sense, the understanding here is that it's somebody could devote their life to benefiting others in an external way. They could make a lot of money and then give it to charity, which is certainly a good thing to do, or they could run a charitable organization. But if they're always getting upset and lashing out at people around them, it's also disturbing the minds of others. So if they might honestly be trying, but in some sense, this is not the ideal practice of a bodhisattva. The main thing is that whatever situation we're in life, that we are transforming that and acting with mindfulness and compassion and skillfully dealing with situations that we encounter. And that's a way of then training the mind. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you can sit and hold your mind in concentration for an hour at a time. That's a useful skill, but it's also not the essence of the practice. Whereas this is more essential for a bodhisattva practice, is to be able to transform the mind in any situation that we experience. So we might have another person who just has a regular job, as long as it's not hurting anybody. So they might just work in a store, or they might work in a business. But every situation they encounter, they're approaching that with this mind of transforming their mind and seeing the situation as a skillful way to train their mind. Then that can be very beneficial for their own development, and it can be very beneficial for the people around them, whether or not people recognize that this person is a Buddhist practitioner. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche used the terms transforming problems into happiness, and that's really the essence of what mind training is about. So something that we label as a problem could be anything. It's a person, it's often a situation, it's circumstances in our life. Those are just bound to happen. There's no way that we're going to avoid those, no matter how wealthy we are, no matter how much influence we have. But if we label them as problems and see them as something to eliminate, to get rid of, then we don't have any opportunity to actually learn and transform ourselves. Right? You could go through your whole life always winning every battle, but is that really so beneficial? When you die, it's not going to come with you. And if you don't actually experience losing and transforming your mind through that, then you might not really gain a whole lot. So if you can, so what Rinpoche would say, transforming problems into happiness, you can actually see it as a positive thing. It's not that we're in denial of what's happening, but it's a matter of how we structure it in our minds, and don't see this as it shouldn't be this way. See, this is the way things are. It's up to me to train my mind to deal with this in a skillful way. So, of course, when we talk about bodhicitta, meaning the thought of enlightenment, it's defined as the thought, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. But in terms of how it's going to manifest in life, the real sign of somebody cultivating bodhicitta is if they're training this way. We can see them in the way that they're skillfully handling situations. When things go wrong, how do they react? That's the real measure of having internalized this practice. So within that, there are many ways to go about this training. There's many books we have here. I have a few here that I'm going to introduce. Because it's not just about having this simple mantra, transform problems into happiness. That's a good start, but there's a lot more. We can think about various situations and reflect on them in our minds and think about ways to handle and ways to think differently and train in those ways of thinking such that when situations occur, it's called applying the antidote. Right? It means that whatever situation arises, the opposite of the antidote, which is the unskillful mindset, is the way of conceiving of the situation in a way that just increases our anger and our frustration. Right? So you might think of an antidote as a kind of pill. And sometimes people might take pills. They get angry too much, and so they take a pill to reduce the whatever hormone is creating anger or whatever else, whatever other way it's understood. Um, but this is a more direct method. Um, if it was the case that anger was purely a matter of physiology, then everybody should get angry with the same situation. Or we could say, well, if it's genetic, some people get just more predisposed to get angry. Again, that's not borne out by evidence. There is something to be said for that, but a lot more of it seems to have to do with conditioning and also training. So somebody could come from a background of angry people and people who get upset easily. That's not just the genetics; it's also the way they're raised is going to affect them. But some people train themselves and change, right? So it's unlikely that it's just purely a physical thing. Whereas the antidote here we're talking about is applying a countermeasure, a different way of thinking. And if we cultivate that, then it will gradually become the natural way of thinking. So when somebody does something that hurts us, our natural reaction is to train the mind. First of all, to see the situation as a manifestation, we could say, of my own karma as Buddhist practitioners, or simply as an opportunity for me to train my mind, rather than seeing this as something that it shouldn't have happened this way, and I should take measures to change it or to make this person be different, which is often very difficult. And then secondly, having compassion for the other person in the situation. Right? That can be difficult when we're frustrated with somebody, but if we've trained in that, it'll be easier. And recognizing that the thoughts that are arising in my own mind are very much coming from me. Right? So we tend to think, when we experience people that make us angry, we experience situations that are frustrating, we tend to think that the situation is causing my anger. That's a misconception in the Buddhist psychology. And it's a misconception according to a lot of modern psychologists as well. They have this, I don't know exactly how they came up with this number, but one very famous cognitive psychologist said that when you're angry, 90% of it is coming from you. I'm not sure how he calculated that, but it sounds about right. Right? If somebody just for no reason comes and slaps you in the face, well, a lot of it's coming from them. We can say it's not 100% coming from you, but how we react to it is very much dependent on us. Many people would react to that in various different ways. And so it has to do with how they've trained themselves before and how they handle the situation now. So in the Tibetan literature, there are a number of well-known mind training texts, we say, different texts that we familiarize with that offer skillful ways of thinking differently. So one of them is the 7-point mind training, which is quite complex and thorough in its analysis. And I'm not going to go over that today. I think I will think about it in a future talk. We can go over that one, because that actually has a lot of outlines and various sort of how do you say? It's quite a broad overview that gives us various ways of dealing with every situation. So it's very good in that way, but for an introductory talk, it might be a bit much. But what I will talk about is 2 texts. So one is the 8 verses of thought transformation or mind transformation, which is very condensed. It's just 8 verses, but very, very much to the point. It's very commonly practiced. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he taught on this in 2016 in Bogai, I remember he said to all the monks and everyone in the audience, not just the monks, he said, really, it's good if you can memorize this text. It's only 8 verses. It's a good thing. If we recite it every day, have it in memory, then it will naturally come to mind. Otherwise, it's not as useful if we just study it at home, but then when we are actually in a situation where we could apply it, we don't remember it. And then we have the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, which is translated here as Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which personally I feel a lot of affinity for. It's a very popular text in Tibet, all the Tibetan schools, not just our art school, the Gelug. Everybody follows this. And in our monastery, we don't actually study it as a separate subject. But a lot of the monks, really all of them, I think, are familiar with it. And personally, I memorized this text over the period of 10 years.
What's it called?
Well, the English one is here, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. The Sanskrit is Bodhisattva Charyavatara, which literally means entering the deeds or engaging in the deeds of the Bodhisattva. So, yeah, we have about 80 people in my class at Sarah. So I think 15 of them have memorized this text. It's not so uncommon, right? People memorize a lot of things, and it's part of our study. It's part of our approach at the monastery. And oftentimes they'll memorize things that are related to the study program directly. So it's quite impressive that out of 80 people, 15 chose this purely elective because it has no real basis. It's not something that you can use in your debates very much because it's not related to most of the topics that we debate. There's some question as to why we don't study mind training in the monastery when it's such an important part of Gelug practice. I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that simply it's not so much a debate. What we're studying in the monastery is more points of deep philosophy that are confusing. Whereas this is more about practical methods. So although it's not something we debate about, it's something that most of the monks, as I mentioned, will read it and they'll probably receive teachings on it. And I think it's, from my experience living in Tibetan monastery now for all these years, it's very much ingrained in the culture. It's quite a learning experience just living with Tibetans. I certainly don't think that it's an enlightened society per se. They have their own hang-ups, but one thing they do really well is train their minds and work skillfully with situations. I very rarely see people get angry. And in 20 years living at the monastery, where most of my friends and classmates are refugees, and many of them were arrested trying to leave the country, they've never been able to go and visit their families. They're not allowed to talk about His Holiness the Dalai Lama on the phone with their families, all kinds of problems. I've never once heard any of them criticize the Chinese government or complain about the situation in Tibet. It's just understood naturally for them that this what's the point of complaining? What's the benefit? What's the benefit of getting angry? Not that they like it, and they're very aware that the system is unfair and they would like to change it. They do express discontent or a sense that it would be better if it was different. But they don't express a sense of just over frustration and this why me and kind of to the point where it's not useful, right? As it's one of the famous passages in this text is if something can be done about it, why worry? If something can't be done about it, why worry? Right? So if something can't be done, what's the help of worrying about it and getting frustrated? It doesn't help, it doesn't affect the situation. All it does is make you unhappy. So it just adds to the problem. So I think in the modern world, something that also, especially in my country, in the USA, it's very much ingrained, we could say, in the culture, is this idea of innovation. When things aren't working, then find a new way to do things, which is also a very good approach. And it's had a lot of success in my country and other countries, but in and of itself, it doesn't always work. You can't always do something about it. And so there are two extremes. One extreme is to never do anything and just always say, well, we can't do anything about it, so we'll just forget it and be happy, which is not bad, but sometimes there actually could be something useful that you do. So I think we really need both, and that's something that also has to come from experience. So this practice of mind training, it takes a long time to really integrate this, and sometimes we can go to the two extremes. We can go to the extreme of just being a bit see, so we're, I don't know if laissez-faire is quite the word. We talked about that in economics, but just letting things be as they are. But sometimes we also need to apply some new method. But that doesn't mean that we have to get frustrated about the situation. Actually, it's more likely that we'll be effective if we can see things in a balanced way. And see, well, I could do this and we'll try it. If it doesn't work, no problem. Let's see, this might actually be a skillful way to deal with it. So I'll go through these texts a bit. So maybe we start with the 8 verses, because that's quite short. And we can just discuss them one at a time. Oftentimes teachers will give, some page 32 here, they'll give a weekend teaching where they're just going through this text over the course of 2 days. So we're just going to do it in about half an hour. So this is by Geshe Langri Tangpa. So the word Geshe, maybe you've heard, it's what the degree that we receive after we study at Sarah for many years. This was adopted by our school, the Geluk, but it was a term that was in place before. So Geshe Langri Tangpa was not a Geluk. This is before the Geluk school existed. Geshe is a translation of the Sanskrit Kalyana Mitra, virtuous friend or spiritual friend. And so that was a term that was applied for a respected teacher. He belonged to the Kadampa school. I believe this was the early school in Tibet based on the teachings of Atisha, who was an Indian master. And Langri Tangpa was renowned for his humility and patience and slow to anger, or really not getting angry. There's a story that because Langri Tangpa was a monk, one woman came and accused him of impregnating her in front of all of his students. So his response was, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry that I've done this." And then the standard thing to do was he then sponsored pujas to atone for his negative actions. But then it was later discovered that it was false, that he hadn't done this. But nevertheless, it was just he didn't want to respond and make her upset by saying, "I didn't do this." So he said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I'll make it up to you." So that's just one example of this practice.
Yeah, but if someone does that today, it face ghastly consequences.
Yeah, well, that's one issue, isn't it? Yeah, it's, as I said, we have to think about when do we apply it and what are skillful ways to deal with it, right? It's a bit extreme. And some people say that when we're doing this practice, if people walk all over us, that we should just let them do so. I also feel a bit hesitant about that. It's something that it's not easy to cultivate the right attitude and do it in exactly the right way. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was always very strong about that. If you read Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, which is probably over there in the free book section, I'm guessing, is the Bodhisattva attitude. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was quite extreme about that. He said it, if people abuse you, well, bodhisattvas want to be abused. They want to be used and manipulated by others because that helps them with their practice and helps them to purify their karmic debts to sentient beings. And Rinpoche certainly, very much like Langri Tangpa, was manifestation of that. everybody who knew Rinpoche for years, not even the slightest trace of anger or upset with anything or anybody at any time. People didn't usually criticize him because there wasn't much to criticize, but things did happen. I've heard stories of people, for example, Rinpoche, when he taught, would often clear his throat rather excessively. Sometimes this would go on for long periods of time. So he came to a teaching one time and was clearing his throat for quite a while, and somebody stood up and yelled at him and said, "What? You're a false teacher. What are you doing? Just you come in here and people expect you to give a teaching, and you just sitting there clearing your throat." And then she walked out and said after she walked out, he just started teaching. Said maybe with Rinpoche's degree of clairvoyance, he saw that she wasn't ready to receive the teachings. Who knows? But anyway, he didn't say anything in response. He didn't say, oh, actually, I'm a good teacher, something like that. It was never anything like that. But for most of us, we do have to temper it, right? If I think it's not incongruent with the practice to take measures. We see people just historically, even just non-Buddhists. So of course, in India, you have Gandhi. In our country, we have people like Martin Luther King, who I think they were not Buddhist, but they were embodying this practice to a significant degree of using situations to train their minds and seeing their people who harm them as objects of compassion. But that didn't mean that they didn't act and do things. They just did it in a much more skillful way because they were not blinded by their own anger. But sometimes we have to err on the side of caution. And personally, if people get angry at me, I do try to just apologize to them, even if I think it's probably unjustified, unless there's some real problem doing it. But if I know that by pointing out that it's unjustified, it's only likely to upset them more, I don't see much benefit in doing that. And if I know that by apologizing, it will defuse the situation, all it's going to do is just, you can say, cause me to lose face, well, that's a good practice. So we have to know, we have to judge the situation as it comes. Now in the Bodhisattva vows, some of you who might know, if you take Bodhisattva vows, one of the secondary faults is not to what do you say in English? Which means not to kind of say diffuse, abandon really criticism towards oneself. So actually, if somebody criticizes you openly and you're a teacher, right? So for example, if you're a well-known teacher and somebody accuses you of sexual abuse and it's not true, it actually is, in certain sense, your duty as a bodhisattva to point out that it's not true so that people don't get the wrong idea. But there are a lot of caveats, and it says, well, you have to look at, is that going to be helpful? Are people going to believe you? But generally speaking, yes, it said that you should actually incur a fault by just letting people say false things about you without without expressing the truth. But if that should be done in the context of knowing that it's going to be effective to do so. If not, then it's okay. It's actually better probably just to let people say what they said and use that situation to recognize how your own mind is reacting to it.
Yes, so people who do this need a whole lot of self-confidence. Because otherwise you can end up
you can end up, it's a good point,
abused and so like you have to, along with doing this, you need to build your own confidence, your own sense of yourself, if you are not to feel downtrodden and but at the same time I can see that you can't cling to yourself like I'm better, so it's like hard, isn't it? Yes.
It's, as I said, it's a very subtle thing. It's not just easy to do this. And so it's true, you have to also be present with your own emotions and work with that. So that's also part of meditation. And that should be informing our daily practice. As we get more experience of working with that, then when things like this happen, we can see the benefit of it. It's not just saying, "Oh, this is good because I'm dealing with my anger." We can actually see how difficult situations bring out aspects of ourselves that then we can work with in meditation. We're not beating up on ourselves, right? We have to be very careful of that. It's not that just because other people criticize us that we're thereby practicing the Bodhisattva path by criticizing ourselves and beating up on ourselves. That's not quite right. We have to also have compassion for ourselves and work with those feelings. But it can be very helpful for meditation to be criticized, because it allows us to see those parts of ourselves that we usually don't, that we usually keep in the kind of outside of our conscious awareness. So it's not easy at all. That takes a lot of skill and training over time and experience with that. Yeah. And as I said, it's we also have to have compassion for ourselves, right? We have practice of compassion doesn't leave you out. Right? You have to also have compassion for yourself. So you have to see in a situation that if this is also causing so much difficulty and problems for me, that it would be lack of compassion for myself to just let this go. And we have to take that into account also. And so, it's not an either or thing. There might be situations where really it is better to react and say something and defend ourselves. We have to judge the situation. And we're never going to do it perfectly because that's very hard to be very advanced. But as time goes on, we can become more skillful in the way we deal with it, because we don't just automatically project all of these problems to the other person. When that happens, because when people criticize us, usually what ends up happening is that we start going through a whole line of thoughts where we're projecting all kinds of things and interpreting the situation in a certain way, where we exaggerate the harm, and we make it we create a story for ourselves where we're completely blameless. Whereas there might be some degree where we did do something. It doesn't mean that it's all our fault, but we have to see both sides of the situation. So like I said, when people criticize me, that's something I really try to practice, is to see that they're also helping me by pointing out things that I may not have seen. And so although I might have a very good motivation and I'm doing something that is benefiting people, for some people that might actually be harmful to them or might not be the right approach for them. And if we just tell ourselves a story, no, I'm a good person, I'm doing good, then we actually don't have the opportunity to learn from what they're saying to us, right? It's not that we deserve to be talked to that way, but if no one else is willing to point that out, then it's actually very useful when somebody does get angry and point out something to us that we would otherwise have been blind to. Yeah, this is not an easy practice, right? But the Bodhisattva path, you have to be courageous, but you also have to be a very sensitive person. It's made to be a little different than the usual kind of courage that we think about. So, okay. So let's begin with this. With this, I just want to go through these verses a little bit. So, with a determination to achieve the highest aim for the benefit of all sentient beings, which surpasses even the wish-fulfilling gem. It's actually, I think, a bit of a grammatical issue here. Sentient beings are more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem is the idea, right? So which surpasses, and it's not clear what it's referring to, but it's that sentient beings are even more precious than a wish-fulfilling gem. May I hold them most dear at all times. Right? That's the essence of it here. That's the first verse, suggesting that we should always remember that how precious sentient beings are. Right? It's because that's easy to overlook when we find people are making us angry. Now, first of all, as Buddhist practitioners, there's a danger that we might think the Buddha is this great teacher. All sentient beings are just degenerate and aren't worthwhile. Okay? We kind of, because of course, there are teachings in the Buddhist mind training that have to do with we should try to overcome our attachment to ordinary things and not act in accordance with the way that most people in the world act. We want to achieve a higher goal, but there's a danger that in doing that, thereby we will just minimalize other people. I think they're all just attached to samsara and not really worth my energy. But we have to remember that it says we become enlightened through there's two things that we need. One is the Buddha to teach us, and one is sentient beings. It's only in relation to others that we become enlightened, because they're our object for which we can generate compassion. They're the object with which we can train. They're what we encounter every day. So we should always see sentient beings as most precious. We're so fortunate to have this opportunity and cultivate that such that when people get angry at us, it's like if your child gets angry at you. It's a very different approach than if it's just a complete stranger. If a very caring mother, when her son or daughter gets angry at her, doesn't mean that she just lets it be, but she treats it as because of concern for the person. It's just naturally a sense of compassion and wanting to help them overcome, because they're concerned. Well, this person really seems to be upset. How can I help them? So if we have that same sense of preciousness of all beings that we have for members of our family, and we can have that attitude. So that's what we have to cultivate in this first verse. And then we have, whenever I interact with someone, may I view myself as the lowest amongst all, and from the very depths of my heart, respectfully hold others as superior. Right? So, again, this is sometimes the opposite of what we're asked to cultivate in some forms of psychology, where we talked about building up our self-esteem. Right? So, as I think I mentioned before, it's not that we're trying to minimalize ourselves and say, I'm nothing, I'm worthless, beat up on ourselves. It's more out of a kind of respect for others, of seeing that I'm just one among billions of people. Our tendency generally is to overinflate the sense of importance of our own problems, our own situations in life. And so we start to train the opposite of that. We see that it's so important to me that other people are happy, and my happiness is not that important to me. The irony of that is that will lead to being more happy. We don't inflate so much this importance of our happiness. And so for example, we're sitting in the restaurant with some friends, and they hand out what's a nice food around here. I guess you could have some kind of Italy or something. So they have 5 Italy cakes, and then there's 6 of you, and everyone else takes one, and you don't get one. Right? And we think, well, why didn't I get this? It looks so delicious, and I didn't get the opportunity to have this. Right? But if we think about it as, I'm so happy everyone was able to enjoy this, it's the same situation, but it's only going to make us happy. It's not going to change the situation at all, whether one way to think about it or another. But it has to do with how we react to it. So we train in this kind of mindset, that we're always happy when other people get what they want. It's unlikely that we're going to end up starving to death from doing that, right? If you just always give away everything, give away all of your money, that's not quite the point. It is good to give away if you have extra. You think, well, how can I? My motivation is to help others, but for that I need to at least sustain my life. But generally speaking, we go above and beyond that. Right? Our degree of self-care is more than is just necessary to sustain our existence. It tends to be often quite extreme. So we overcome this this, it says, respectfully hold others as superior. It's because we think about the good qualities of other people. When people criticize us, rather than just demonizing them and thinking about all the reasons that they're a bad person, we all have to think about all the good things. There are many good qualities in many people and everybody. So we always want to try to remember that and think about how fortunate we are, rather than to think I'm so unfortunate to have such lousy friends and lousy people in my life. But that's mostly coming from us, right? Whatever group of people we're with, we're going to find problems with them. We can see that, right? Even people in power who are the most powerful people in the world and are surrounded by people who ideally would be the most skilled people in the world, oftentimes are very dissatisfied with people around them. We're always going to find some reason to be dissatisfied with others, but just a matter of what we focus on. So next, in all my deeds, may I probe into my mind, and as soon as mental and emotional afflictions arise, as they endanger myself and others, may I strongly confront and avert them. And so that's the other side of it, as I was mentioning before, based on your question. It's not just about how we deal externally, it's how we deal with our own mind. So as soon as afflictions arise in our mind, meaning just mental disturbance, we get angry, we get very greedy or attached to something or a person, right? We should all examine what's going on. We should be very curious. This is a very important skill to cultivate that is not natural for a lot of people. We tend to think about what's happening externally and not analyze. This is the word sheshin in Tibetan, which I think is prayoga in Sanskrit, which means being. It's I think introspection might be the best translation, but it really means awareness in the sense that we are aware of what's happening in our minds. And it's a difficult skill to cultivate, and that it's helpful to meditate to get that skill, but then it should also happen all of the time. Whatever is happening, part of us is also recognizing what's going on in the mind. And it says, endangering myself and others. We see that as a danger. As soon as we see anger arising in our mind, we see that as a dangerous thing, that this could easily explode and cause problems for myself and for the people around me. So strongly confront and avert them. So again, it's not that we just push them down. That's not the point here. We learn to work with them. And when we find ourselves upset, we learn to experience that upset rather than trying to change the situation and trying to make it go away by changing things externally. We think, well, where is this coming from? Where did this start? Why? Because it's not just coming from what's happening outside. It's like it's bringing to the surface something that was already there. And so if we just change the situation and make it go away, it's just going to come again later. So it comes both from our working with this externally and also with our work in our personal meditation. So the number 4, when I see beings of unpleasant character oppressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I had discovered a jeweled treasure. So this is somewhat similar to the first verse when we said we should, in general, see all beings as so precious. But here, it's a particular situation. So really the point is when we encounter very difficult people who are very nasty and very short-tempered, we should even more so see this as very precious. I'm so fortunate to have this opportunity. And this person has so much potential to change. There's so much that I can do to help this person if I can work skillfully with them. Doesn't mean that I go and lecture to them and tell them how to transform their minds. It's unlikely to work unless they ask for it, even if they do. Really, the most important thing is that we can react in a way that will be a good example for them, and they might have pause to think about things. So we have to learn to be very creative, actually, in the way that we work with people.
So, Lamaji, are you saying
Yeah,
the benefit of encountering a person like that is simply that it gives us an occasion to help them or serve them? But besides that, how does it help us?
Yeah, it helps us because we have the opportunity to practice patience. Right. So as we'll see, and if we get to Shantideva's text today, he has a whole section on this, that we think there's no opportunity to practice patience if nobody makes us upset.
Mhm.
That's a very important point. Right. So he says, like, for example, if we never encounter poor people, we'll never have anybody to whom to practice charity. So in the same way, if we never encounter people who treat us badly, then there's no possibility of practicing patience. And he says, especially if we're practicing this path and we are acting gently most of the time, then it's very rare that people will actively try to harm us. So he says it's like when just out of nowhere a jewel just appears in your home. It's very rare that would happen, but you're so happy. I just got this wonderful gift in my home. It's very similar that when finally I encountered somebody who's treating me badly, who I can actually practice patience here. And he says, Santideva is very thorough in his analysis. He says, well, then you might think, well, it's not that they're actively trying to help me. So why is it similar to, like, whereas the jewel is something that actually, or somebody gives me money, it's very different. But he says, well, for example, the Dharma, the Buddha taught the Dharma, the teachings are not actively trying to help us. It's the insentient thing. But still, we praise the Dharma and put it on the altar and prostrate to it. So he says, well, maybe you might come back and say, well, not only are they not trying to help me, they're actively trying to harm me. It's different. But then we say, well, if it, like a doctor, they just work for my benefit, how am I ever going to learn patience? If everybody in the world just pampered me all of the time, then I'd just be spoiled, right? So we're very fortunate to be able to act a little bit more mature and try to deal with difficult people. So again, it doesn't mean that we just allow them to do what they're doing. It's a matter of the attitude that we have. Sometimes we have to set limits with people, and sometimes we might have to even, we might have to enforce laws and put them in jail or whatever. But it's just a matter of how the mindset that we have and how we deal with it.
So venerable.
Yeah.
Like generally, certainly in India, but I'm sure if you're socioeconomically, like if you're economically
underprivileged,
yeah, then typically you get treated badly.
Yeah.
Like because there are people who will, like if you're let's say a delivery person, you will go through you'll go through abuse. I mean, delivery boys, they go through so much pain. Now, if someone was a delivery boy and was trying to practice and leading a life where they are, constantly getting abused because that's their job, right? They face traffic, they deliver late, they deliver the wrong order because the restaurant maybe backs and
yeah.
So how do they do that? If you are in a situation, maybe because of your work or whatever, where you are going to get a lot of criticism all through the day, and maybe not because you are at fault.
Yeah. It's a very hard thing. It's not like we just say, oh, we'll practice patience. It's so easy. It's not like that. And the first thing is that person has to acknowledge the situation. The more awareness they can have of what's going on. And oftentimes they might not even really think about it. It's just so natural. We're so used to being abused. Recognize that actually people are treating me in an inappropriate way. This is not what I deserve. And have a sense of self-worth also. That really I'm not just a worthless person. I know that. I know that
what they're doing to me is not appropriate. But then what do I do about it? So at first, in most situations, if I just react and get angry back at them, it's probably just going to make it worse. But recognizing when there is an opportunity to do something. So that's when we, for example, people demonstrate and speak out against abuse. But they do so when they recognize that it's going to be effective, and they have a sense of sort of confidence, not just in me and because I'm right and you're wrong, but in a sense of a moral principle. So first of all, they have to embody that themselves, right? Like if my superiors are beating on me, but I also beat on my inferiors, then I don't have a lot of, say, power of truth to be able to say, this is not right what you're doing to me. So we have to also cultivate a sense of spiritual power within ourselves. But then sometimes there might be an opportunity. We see that historically. Some of the people I mentioned, where they were in a situation where they could actually speak out, and because of the power of the veracity of what they were saying, it thereby led the people who are oppressing them to question their own actions. We have to recognize when that's likely to work and not work. Right. So, for example, in India, with Gandhi and the British regime, it was a situation where the British regime was ostensibly trying to help the Indians. That's what they considered themselves to be doing. And a lot of them actually really believed that. And so to point out to them the flaw in their thinking, it's not that you were just saying, don't do this and stop it, I'm going to forcefully stop you, but it's appealing to their own sense of what they're doing. Whereas if it was a regime that was explicitly committing genocide and thought that the people were worthless, it probably wouldn't be very useful to say this isn't appropriate. To say, yeah, but I don't care. I just want to act this way. So you have to see when it's going to be effective to work that way. And it's not just, so if they are committing genocide, again, it's not that we just tolerate it, but we have to have a very broad view of the situation and know when is it going, what is the way to deal with this? And if we really can't do anything about it, if we really recognize that anything we do is just going to bring more abuse upon ourselves, that's unfortunate. But there's always an opportunity to train the mind, no matter what's happening. And so, I think, because of course your original question is, when people are in positions where they're being down, minimized or being abused. So I think really the main point is that you have to also be patient in a worldly sense. You have to recognize that it's unlikely to change right now. And so have a broader perspective. And even if it doesn't change within our lifetime, we recognize that we, as spiritual practitioners, we're not just thinking about today and my happiness today. We're thinking, okay, this is the reality of what's happening now. If I want to be enlightened in a distant time in the future, what is the best way for me to use this situation towards that? It's always possible. It's always possible to practice that way. It may always be possible to change the situation, but it's always possible to make progress within that situation. For example, so just to right to the point of what I was saying, we have the situation that was here in India, and now we have the situation that's happening in Tibet with the Chinese, and the way His Holiness the Dalai Lama has dealt with that for many, many years. He's doing a lot, but he recognizes that active protest in Tibet, for example, it generally just brings more abuse. And as I mentioned, my classmates, they're aware that there's not a lot they can do about it. For example, I know two, there's actually quite a few, I'm sure, but there were two teachers from our monastery who were very well respected, who managed to go back to Tibet and were teaching, and then were poisoned, died. Right? So, that's just what happened. It's unfortunate, but that's how the situation is unfolding now.
Poisoned by the Chinese.
Well, I mean, I say that, right? We can't, unless we investigate the situation very thoroughly, I can't make a legal statement about it, right? But this is the general understanding of what happened. That anyway, I mean, I don't want to have to get into too much into it, but the point is that it's although what they were doing was, we would say generally in most worldly circles, we would say that was a very righteous thing to be doing. It's not treated that way, right? It's not treated as recognized the sort of the basic rights of the person, and so that's just how it is right now. But what the Tibetans anyway are doing is they're doing what they can, biding their time and being in exile, continuing to sustain their culture and not allowing the propaganda of the oppressive regime to convince them that they're worthless. That's the best thing they can be doing. And the situation might change. Might be at a certain point where it's actually they can do something. And it's certainly, they'll have a lot more to do, that they've preserved their culture quite intact for the past 60 years, well, more than 60 years, than if they just gave up and just tried to integrate with the modern world and forget about the whole thing. So they're doing something, but you can't always, it might take a long, long time. And now His Holiness is 90 years old, and it's uncertain whether in his lifetime it's going to change. Another example is Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you might know, the Vietnamese monk who was exiled from Vietnam, but he did eventually go back. It took, I think it was about 40 years that he was in exile. Right. So political situations change, right? But trying to hasten that change too rapidly in an unskillful way might just backfire. Like when I was in college, somebody gave a talk actually on mind training. I believe it was a nun that came to our school, and one of the students, because we had an international relations department, there were a lot of students involved in studying diplomacy, and one of them challenged it and said, well, isn't this what caused the situation in Tibet, and that His Holiness didn't resist the Chinese, and thereby that's why this happened, they were taken over. But really, if we look at the situation, if the Tibetans had tried to fight back, it would have been a lot worse. There was no chance of them having any resistance to. If they had made preparations 40 years ahead of time, then yes, that's the 13th Dalai Lama actually tried to do that. But he wasn't taken seriously in the country, unfortunately. So by the time the Chinese actually came, it was too late. There was no chance of actually doing anything. So fleeing the country was probably the most skillful thing they could do, right?
Namaji, is it the case that whether for individuals or entire social groups, suppose they are in a difficult situation, one way to reconcile with it is to look at it from a karmic perspective and say, this is something that is happening to me because of something that I did in this life or something.
Yes.
I should not have resentment against this person who is acting as a vehicle for this to happen to me.
Yes.
And that, if we adopt that position, then we wouldn't have that anger and that resentment against that person, but our focus would be on our own internal reform.
Absolutely. That's one of the ways, one of the most important ways of training here. There are many. So I mentioned, for example, this is thinking of this person is giving me the opportunity to practice patience. There's also, it's a related point, is thinking about this person is allowing me to purify my past karma. I created the causes for this. That's also in Shadideva's text, we see that. It's not explicit in here, in this 8 verses, but it's assumed. It's assumed that we see it that way. So it's not just useless, right? So that's another thing. Like she asked about the delivery boy who's being abused. I mean, it doesn't justify it, right? We have to be very careful with karma. There can be a kind of karmic fatalism where we think, well, this is just how it has to be. My life has to be this way. It could always change, but we recognize this is how it is right now. And ultimately, this is a manifestation of my karma.
And so it had to be, but it doesn't have to be in the future.
In the future,
it
right.
had to be
Yeah.
in the
Exactly.
present, but it doesn't have to continue to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be continued to be. So we recognize that it's positive in a certain way. It doesn't justify it, but it is a positive opportunity for us to work with this. And we can say, like, if you can imagine if you were going to actually be able to choose your future rebirth, would you choose, if you were really intent on spiritual practice, just to have a pleasant life where nothing goes wrong? Or would you choose to have a life with a lot of challenges? And if you think about it that way, you think, well, how I chose to be here. I chose to have these challenges. Why am I seeing it as a problem now? This is my opportunity to do something, to do it in a different way. I've encountered this same experience many times in past lives, and because I wasn't skillful in my response, it's happened again. So now is my opportunity to be more skillful and find a creative way to deal with it. And that, again, it takes a lot of patience. We might take many years of biding your time and not allowing per se, but just recognizing, like, this is happening and there's not much I can do. But slowly building something up that will eventually actually give us the power to overcome this. And more importantly, that it will give us not just to destroy the thing, but to actually resolve the situation. Like, for example, we talk about the situation with the Tibetans and the Chinese. I don't think it would be a satisfactory ending to this whole situation in Tibet if the Tibetans were to suddenly get these great weapons and drive all the Chinese back to China. That's not really what we want. Ideally, it would be that it comes to a better situation than it started with, which I think one of the most ideal outcomes would be that China, being a Buddhist culture, being that most of the people in the country are actually very much in favor of Buddhist practice among the common people, if they started to reawaken that and then started to see the Tibetan land and the people as a positive addition to their culture, and then treated them as people that we actually respect and we want to learn from you. And then Chinese culture then transformed as the result of that. That would be much more satisfactory. So that could happen if the Tibetans continue to maintain their practice. If they violently fought back, it would pretty much assure that wouldn't happen, right? So we have to be confident in what we're doing. And if we're in a situation where we are being oppressed, we shouldn't just allow that to cause us to give up our own principles. We should always maintain those. We might have to modify them. We might recognize that we were a bit naive. But certain fundamental ones we can modify, we can adapt to new situations. Okay. So we finished 4 verses, and I think you mentioned maybe at 11:15 we have a little bit of a break. Now, Venerable Legdin had mentioned the danger of the break, that people will then congregate and be talking, and the people online might. Oh, looks like the computer is about to run out of battery, it says. So the people online might disappear, or my computer might die. So I hope you'll all be back here soon. We'll just it's 11:15, so we can say that by 11:30, the latest, we'll continue. Whether people are assembled or not, I'll just start talking. But please have some time to stretch and if you need some tea or something. Okay, so we'll continue now. 11:30. So, as I said, not surprisingly, I'd thinking we could go through the 8 verses and then go through Shantideva's text, and then had 2 other large subjects to talk about. We're only halfway through this, but that's good. Good to talk about things carefully and thoroughly, not just rush through them. So next in is we have 2 verses especially about what to do when others mistreat us. Right? The number 4 was about in general people who are difficult, but here we have when people mistreat us. This is the best opportunity to practice mind training. So we see number 5, when others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse, slander, and scorn, may I take upon myself the defeat and offer the others the victory. And that's the most important practice here. That is the essence of it. So taking defeat upon ourselves and offering the victory to others. Right? So it's sort of like the Christian saying that we have to turn the other cheek, right? Essentially what we're trying to do here. So in most situations, this seems to be the most skillful way to behave. And as I said before, we have to temper. It's not that we never react and never do anything. In response. But generally speaking, this is a very important attitude to cultivate. Especially when it's just a minor thing. Somebody else insists it's this way, and I say it's this way, and just okay, well, you're right, we can do it this way. So, or just we're deciding on how we want to spend our time, and one person wants to go to the zoo, and I want to go to the amusement park. It doesn't really matter that much in the end, but I just say, okay, we'll do it as you like. It's best for our own mental happiness, right? If we went to the amusement park and would we get more happiness out of that than just thinking all day that I made this other person unhappy? It's probably unlikely we'd actually get that much enjoyment in the end, because we have to then live with the results of our actions and the knowledge that we just took what we wanted at the expense of somebody else. So yes,
Wondering if we lead a more intentional life, and if we know what our intention is, then we are able to kind of stay away from engaging or reacting in a certain way. Right? So, for instance, in the 4th point of the 5th time, if we determine our intention in mind, we wake up as to what is our intention, which is to develop vichita, or we're practicing a certain aspect of mind training. For this month, if I'm promising myself that I'm going to be patient, and then so there will be things that come up through the day where the quality of patience will be tested. And if I keep that intention in my mind, then it becomes easier to say, oh, okay, I'm not going to, that's more important than this, so I'm not going to indulge in this. So it anchors you somewhere. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, again, we keep the goal in mind, right? That makes it a lot easier. Makes it a lot easier to take the defeat when we see this is only temporary and this is actually helping me. It's not that we just allow all the time to be pushed around and never get what we want and live an impoverished life. It's that we see it as how fortunate to be able to practice this way. By taking the defeat now and creating the causes, first of all, not to experience this in the future, because I've thereby allowed it to just play itself out rather than trying to fight it, and also having the imprint not to get angry again, so that if it happens again, I'm less likely to be upset if I don't get my way, because I'm training and just allowing things not to go the way I want them to go. And if we see that as in an ultimate sense, I'm training myself toward enlightenment, then we can be quite happy with and content with that situation.
And what I meant was that's a big goal. I mean, and you tend to forget the big goals in life. When you engage in life, day-to-day interaction, the big goal, and you can get hijacked and all of that. So I was wondering, and it helps me personally. If I have take a month of, say, I want to be loving and kind.
Mhm.
Then that's the intention for that month.
Okay.
And then
Mhm.
every day when that intention gets questioned, when something comes up, I'm remembering that, hey, we're
Mhm.
still in July. I have to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
loving and kind.
Okay.
And then
yeah.
the next month is patience.
Right,
The next
okay,
month is,
okay.
I mean, that way, at least
Yeah, yeah.
you're anchoring yourself in
Yeah.
some kind of
Yeah,
practice.
that's helpful to use it in
And
that
at a
way.
very basic kind of level.
Yeah, we can definitely, we have to have sort of short-term goals as well, right? If we're only thinking about a very long-term goal, it's very, yeah, out of beyond our current capacity. But it is encouraged generally, this is as Bodhisattva practice, to think about the long-term goal also, even if it seems very far off and it seems that it's not relevant to what I'm experiencing now. The more we can cultivate that, then that attitude will continue in the future lifetime and eventually carry us to that goal. But in the short term, yes, we should, it's good if we can set short-term goals for ourselves. So if I say, well, I got angry 10 times last month, I'll try to get only angry 5 times this month.
I mean, that's
Then-
a little doable.
Yeah, and it's also something reasonable within our reach rather than next month I'm just going to be completely altruistic and not have a single thought for myself. It's unlikely. But we can think, may I have that in the future? I have the aspiration to eventually achieve that. That's also important to keep that aspiration.
Venerable, when you say that the verse says that you have to take the consequences of the abuse or slander or whatever.
Yes, abuse, slander, and
Yeah, you have to
scorn.
take the
defeat.
abuse, slander, and scorn on yourself.
Yes.
Then before doing that, you should also be aware of that, because when you take abuse and slander, okay, abuse one thing, but slander on yourself, maybe there will be consequences that you might have to face, like in a work situation.
Yes.
You might maybe lose your job, or maybe cost you your promotion, or maybe just have your reputation as a productive person or a competent person jeopardize, and which could then affect you going forward in that organization. And so the consequences might be like, you have to be aware that, okay, these consequences, I think I can reasonably deal with them, so I'll do it. But these consequences, I might be out of a job and I need to support my family, so I won't do. I guess you'll have to do that kind of balance, right?
Yeah, again, as I said, it says if there's something we can do about it, why worry? The point being that if we can do something, if there's a recourse, then we can do that, right? The point here is not to have the excessive worry about it, right? Like oftentimes, it's just that we don't want to let the situation end this way. We want to point out, we want to have the last word in the situation. So somebody says, you're stupid. Well, I want to say back, oh, well, you're stupid. So I can at least get that satisfaction of saying that. Doesn't really help the situation, right? But if it's the case that somebody is intentionally trying to undermine what we're doing, and it's unjustified, and there is a recourse that we can take, then we can do that. But then also, like for example, if somebody tells my boss that I'm not doing my work properly and they're lying, I can point out to my boss that that's not true, and then thereby I'm absolved of the problem. But then to go beyond that and then say to my boss, by the way, that what they said was a lie, why don't you go and punish them? Right? I mean, if it really is necessary to do that, if it's really helpful, that's one thing. But if it's just because that it gives us the mental satisfaction of knowing that I got my way, and not only that, but I completely trampled on my opponent and made his life miserable, that's not necessarily going to help. And it might just create the situation again, because this person is now bitter about what happened. And so we try to find the best answer for this, something that satisfies both parties. As I said before, like the situation in Tibet, we take into account everybody. Just because somebody treats us badly doesn't mean that we thereby just discredit or discount wanting to find a solution that's going to help them. The main point is that
when people criticize us, we don't have the sense of I need to get back at them, and that doesn't really help anything. We need to tit for tat, as we sometimes say. It's like we don't have to pay back everything. And so if the situation ends where I got criticized and they didn't, we can rejoice in that and say, well, I'm very happy I didn't create any more negative karma now. If they did that, well, that's their karma. It says the Buddha, only the Buddha knows what's really going to be the result of that. I don't really know their mind. Maybe they're the Buddha. Maybe they're actually just doing this for help us. So we can't say. But again, with Shantideva, he says, well, if my being unhappy is not going to hurt him, my enemy, so what's the use to me of this? Even if it did, even if my being unhappy was going to harm him, right? Well, if the point is that I'm thereby satisfied because he's harmed, what is more vile than that? Meaning, if I just get satisfaction out of hurting people, right, that has no benefit for me. That's a despicable practice. He's saying, it doesn't. So the point is, we have the intention to want to rectify the situation, not to harm the person, right? But there are a lot of times where we just can't do much, and it actually is probably useful just to diffuse the situation by saying, okay, you can have your way, that's okay with me, right? And eventually they might start to see what they're doing, but it's unlikely that the directly challenging them is necessarily going to solve it. We have to know, to be able to judge the situation, know what's the most skillful way to respond.
So how do you view what's happening in Los Angeles, the protests, and and what's happening in your country where
that's a good
people
point.
are being rounded up and tortured and abused and of course thrown out sometimes and unfairly and everything and framed. And that. Well, I suppose it's going to be hard for them to rejoice or see how
it's very hard what's happening in my country. It's our karma too as Americans, I would say. But also we have to look very deeply into what's happening. Why did this happen in the first place? I was already very concerned about the direction of the country when I lived there back 2001, for example, after the terrorist attacks. I was very concerned, not about the terrorist attacks per se, but about the reaction of the country. And on both sides, right? I was on the side of protesting against the wars that we were initiating, but I was very concerned about the attitude of the protesters. There was a lot of demonization on the other side. And I didn't think they were that bad. I didn't think they were as bad as people were saying. And that has, I believe, gradually, that was already the manifestation of something that was happening before, like everything is. But I've been out of the country now for 20 years, and I was a bit shocked when some of the things started happening, in the past 10 years, because I was sort of out of nowhere, having not been there and seeing the progression. But looking back on it now, I can see how the seeds of that were there. So now it's gotten to come to a head. It's very hard to diffuse the situation when it's at that point, right? So I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything now, but it's also to reflect on this. This didn't just come out of nowhere, and everyone in the country, to some extent, has played a role in creating the situation. So even if we just diffuse it immediately right now, the seeds of that are still very much there, and we have to look very deeply if we want to change, if we want to transform things. So personally, as an American, I feel if I went back to my country and just protested against the government, it's unlikely to be that effective right now. Maybe it would be. It depends who I am also, right? But I think training my own mind now and training to be able to offer teachings in the future, to think about the long term. I don't think there's much I can do now. It might be that it's certain things are going to change. We don't know how they're going to change, for the better or worse, or maybe it's a mix of both. But there might be a point where there's an opening where I do know this is the right time to go, and where I can actually be of benefit to some people and say things that will be that will be taken seriously. So I think of it honestly, and I hope it's not this extreme, but I think about what happened in Germany in the 1930s, right? And I think the people who fled the country were probably right to do so. I don't think their staying there would have helped. They would have been killed. So it's kind of going in that direction. I hope it doesn't get that extreme. But at this point, I think we have to also be, like I said about the Tibetans, right? They were prudent about what they could do. And fortunately, by being in exile, they've been able to build something that when things change, they can still go back and still have something to offer. Right? That's how I felt even in 2003 and 4 when we were protesting. I felt what I'm doing is not helping. People aren't listening to me. I don't have any skills really to offer. And so there's better things I can do with my time that in the future, when the time is right, I can do something. So for some people, it is the right time. They might recognize that. They have to know, like I mentioned about people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. I think they were at the time when they both had the skills and there was an audience, and it was the right time to do what they did. And we have to judge, is that going to be the case now? And at least my feeling is I don't know what I could possibly do. Yeah.
Venerable.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So actually, it's a continuation of what the questions were. So we always talk about the two wings, the compassion and the wisdom. So though intellectually we understand we need to keep the balance of the two wings, even in the small really acts of some charity which you're giving to your house help or whatever, there is always this thing: how do I judge where I'm doing too much of wisdom, or the wisdom is lacking and there's too much of idiot compassion? There's always this thing: is there some parameter where you can judge how to really balance? Because sometimes you feel if there's too much wisdom, then you're becoming less generous and less compassionate. So how do we really balance the two wings? There's always, on a day-to-day basis, I feel it's always a challenge. Any advice?
Well, that's a very deep question, right? It's not like this is a simple answer. The one thing I would say is, if it's too much wisdom that it's then precluding compassion, it's probably not really wisdom, right? If we have real wisdom, it should increase our compassion. But at the same time, there's times when we might emphasize one over the other. And so we might find that we're already developed quite a good intellectual understanding of things, but then it's really time to practically work with people and develop our skills of just our ability to practically help people and to work with difficult situations. That's also going to increase our wisdom, but it's a different kind of wisdom. So I think, and something I didn't mention, actually, it's good you pointed this out, because I did want to say this in the context of mind training. I think even more fundamental, because I said, of course, there's the aspect of taking the defeat upon ourselves, offering the victory into others, but really the most essential thing is that we learn to pay attention to the messages life is sending us. And oftentimes we ignore those. We think when people get angry at us and tell us our faults, we just think about all the reasons they're bad, rather than trying to really listen. What can I learn? Although people aren't treating me properly, this is something I could learn from this. Right? If everybody I meet just ends up saying to me that you just can't deal well with situations, you have poor social skills, even if it's inappropriate to say that, I have to start to take seriously that is how people perceive me, and try to do something about it. So likewise, with sort of as to your question about wisdom, if it's too abstract, right, we have to also learn from the situations that we experience in life. And so we might think that we have a great understanding of the Buddhist teachings. We might intellectually have such an understanding, but if we can't deal with situations and actually, when things happen, to learn to hear the messages that life is sending us, then the wisdom becomes very divorced from experience. So the same thing with compassion. It's not just about a feel good or a kind of sympathy, or even, how do you say, like, what's the word? There's a word I'm searching for in English, starts with an S, but anyway, it's when it just becomes sort of overblown emotion, as opposed to sometimes compassion can be very streamlined and straightforward and to the point, but it's about dealing with the difficulties of ordinary situations in a skillful way. It doesn't always mean that you have a smile on your face or that you look like an angel or something like that, but that you have the compassion to consider the situation and work with it as it is, rather than how you want it to be.
So on the path of bodhicitta, we always say that I'll consider all sentient beings as my mothers, because they've been my mothers since beginningless time. So in that particular aspect, I always feel, there is an overwhelming compassion. And, it always comes down to, say, pests and cockroaches. Of course, that's a classic case where you feel, okay, even if there are pests, infesting my kitchen, but, that cockroach has been my mother since beginningless time. So, that's where the wisdom drops. And then you wonder, whether I should just do wisdom and forget about bodhicitta. So that's all the dilemmas which you face day to day. So that's always the confusion and the dilemma.
Yeah, I think so. The word I was searching for before now came to my mind is sentimental, right? So we don't. It doesn't just mean that we show a face of compassion and we're always crying when people are suffering and we think, oh, I'm so sad. I'm so sorry for you. Sometimes that's not really compassion. That could be just a show, right? Whereas when we actually can skillfully deal with it, the person might not appear compassionate. So I think you're saying that it's not a matter of what emotion we express, or what, whether we cry when we hear about things. It's a matter of how we have the sort of the courage to be a sensitive person. I mentioned that at the beginning. We're willing to work with the situation and not stand off from it and say, there's all these problems in the world and the people around me. I'm here to help, but I'm not part of this. Right? I don't have any emotions about it myself. Whereas, as opposed to actually just having to deal with the real situation and recognizing also the impact it's having on us, is to be present with people. That's a compassionate practice. Just to be there in the first place, not to be, like a rich person, the classic kind of extreme of they're sitting up on their horse and they just throw a coin down to a beggar. That's a very different kind of compassion than somebody who's actually willing to be at their level and work with them. So we have to acknowledge our limitations and not have this sense of being. So that this kind of paradox, we could say, there's a tension within the Bodhisattva path, that you have to be an extremely courageous person, somebody that they often compare the Bodhisattva to a hero. The word in Tibetan, sempa, means heroic mind, but at the same time be very humble, and not have any great sense of how great I am because I'm a Bodhisattva. And that's why it's strongly discouraged from ever saying I'm a Bodhisattva, even if you know that you have bodhicitta. Now, I think actually this person I mentioned, Langri Tampa, the author of this text, there's also a story that there was a flood coming, I believe. I might have all the details not quite right, but there was a flood coming and there was a concern about it. So he wrote something, like I think he wrote on stone or wrote in the sand, if Langri Tampa is a bodhisattva, may the flood be averted. And then it was averted. So he knew that he was, but he didn't go around advertising that fact. That would be detrimental, and that would be a very strong sign that it's unlikely that he really is.
Thank you. That's most helpful.
Yeah. Okay. It's a bit of a digression from what you said, but I think some things
No,
that are,
sorry, I don't know whether my question itself was a digression from the topic.
yeah,
so
yeah. Okay. So there's
Thank
a
you.
question here too. I know you've been waiting for a while.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In verse 5.
Yeah.
So if I apply that to my personal relationships. for
Right.
example,
Hmm.
So if I am dealt with some, out of jealousy, scorn, or any
Mhm.
kind of verbal accusation,
Mhm.
maybe repeatedly, and I know in my heart that it's not true.
Mhm.
So do I really need to not offer any explanation? And is it just best to take upon the defeat and let the other person say you can say what you want?
Mhm.
Or like, should I really offer an explanation? Because then I may be accused of not engaging in proper communication
Mhm.
later on.
Mhm.
So, what is the best way? Is it best to just accept, the defeat and offer the victory to the other?
Well, I think accepting the defeat and offering the victory is very much a mental attitude. And so we want to get over this sense that I want to win. I want to come out of the situation with it clear that I was right. But at the same time, we have to judge the situation and know when there is an effective opportunity for communication. That's also very good to train in ways of speaking differently. The way that we frame it can make a big difference, and that also is going to affect how we think about it. And so when we learn, they call nonviolent communication. It's something that's been talked about a lot in recent years. That's really important. That's a very good skill to learn, so that we can frame this. We can make it clear that that kind of behavior is inappropriate without framing it as you're being bad to me and what you're doing makes me unhappy. That phrase in and of itself is not skillful. Right? We have to recognize that's not really true. The person is not the cause of my unhappiness is there's a lot of different reasons for that happening, and the person themselves, what they're doing, is not ultimately the cause. And it doesn't help, right? It doesn't help to say what you're doing makes me unhappy. And if we think that way also, which is going to increase the problem for us. Whereas if we can say to somebody that, just even a simple difference of saying, when you speak like that, I feel unhappy. That's true. That's undeniable. But then we have to recognize why is that happening. But also, it's a little easier for them to hear that and to think, oh, I don't want her to be unhappy. And if I speak this way and she feels unhappy, there's some connection. And so I'd like to diffuse that. Whereas this direct accusation, you're making me unhappy, is often just going to increase their resistance. So we can train in those things ahead of time. So especially if we're in a relationship with someone that's abusive to us or in some kind of situation in life, then I think there are a lot of skills we can train in to work skillfully. So we have the attitude, but then we also can have a lot of skill sets of verbal skills to be able to diffuse it in a non-violent way. Yeah. Okay. So now verse 6 is very similar to number 5, but it's a slight difference. So it says, when someone whom I have helped or in whom I have placed great hopes mistreats me in extremely hurtful ways, may I regard him still as my precious teacher. Right? So these kind of things will happen, right? We put a lot of hope in somebody. We have all kinds of expectations, and then they aren't realized, and it ends up being quite the opposite. They return our kindness with abuse, with scorn. So then we use that situation. We see this is the teacher. It's like related to what I was saying before, but when we get messages from life, we see that this is the manifestation of my teacher. My teacher is not just this person up on a throne who's so perfect. Because I would not have seen this if this person had not acted this way. So maybe it's a little different than the last one where we talk about accepting defeat and offering the victory. And it's maybe somebody who we're in a relationship with or something like that. Whereas here, it's maybe we can think of it as somebody that we've trained, like a child or something like that. And that, of course, there's also the practice of offering the victory, but in terms of our own perception of it, that we train to see what they're doing as a teaching for me. Again, it doesn't justify it. It doesn't mean that we don't necessarily take some countermeasure, but we do see it. We can see the positive in it. Like, for example, with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he always says that the Chinese, I'm so fortunate for the Chinese. If it hadn't been for them, I would not have encountered the rest of the world and learned about all these different cultures. So there's always something positive we can take from it, even if it's very hard. And we don't lose anything from seeing it that way. It's only going to benefit us to see it in a positive light. And then if there is something we can do about it, then they're also our teacher by giving us the opportunity to train in acting skillfully. Rather than just, the problem is when we approach situations, it's so obvious that I'm right and so obvious that they are wrong. Then we don't really learn from it. We don't see that there's two sides to every situation. No matter how right I am, it's never 100%. There's always something to be said for their point of view. And we can start to have a more nuanced view of things rather than seeing situations black and white. So then we have verse 7. In brief, may I offer benefit and joy to all my mothers, both directly and indirectly. So mothers, of course, for those of you who don't know, that's just in the Buddhist understanding of things, that we think about how all sentient beings have in some past life been our mothers, because we've been connected to everyone since beginningless lifetimes. So we refer to them that way, but the understanding is just all sentient beings are ones that are precious to us, ones that we have some strong connection with. So to think that we want to offer everything to them. So if it makes this person happy to slap me, we can think, I'm very happy to offer them that. I'll offer them this opportunity to feel good, even if it's very minor, even just a little thing. Imagine how the mental suffering they're going through, that at least I can offer them something. I can offer them some relief by being the object of their anger. We can cultivate that attitude, then gradually it will happen more naturally. It doesn't come from lack of self-respect. It comes from really concern for the other person. So to all my mothers, both directly and indirectly. So we can do this in direct ways of going and helping people, but in other indirect ways, just by being present, being a calming presence in that person's life, by being a compassionate person. So eventually, they'll get something out of that, right? We can all think of situations where people were abusive to us. And if we never returned their abuse with more abuse, even if then that was the end of the situation, there might be a time when they start to think, and they can think back on it and think, they learn from what they did. So we can be happy that we were able to offer them that. So as to may I quietly take upon myself all the hurts and pains. So think, I can imagine just the amount of suffering they're going through. The amount that it affects me is pretty minor. So to be able to think, at least I'm able to take that much away from them, from what they're experiencing.
But what if you thought that instead of making them happy by letting whoever to slap you, you're actually feeding into their anger, or you're feeding, you're not helping them get over, because they keep slapping you maybe again and again and again. You realize that by being this kind of a person who takes everything, it's not helping them, because they are just using this as a short-term way of expressing their. That could also happen. And then you could probably decide that you don't want to make them happy because it's not happiness. it is actually feeding their anger.
Mhm.
That's possible, right?
Absolutely, it's possible. We have to judge the situation. But it's also very likely, even, that if we just directly confront them about it, that it will just increase their anger. And so it might take a long time. It might be that we put up with this for a long time before there's the opportunity to say something that, in a way, in a time when they're ready to hear that. Because it's unlikely we're just going to change their behavior overnight. That's often part of the problem with situations. So we want to change people. We want them to be different, but we have to recognize that, like I said, of the situation in my country, there are a lot of causes and conditions that brought this about. And it's not just going to change overnight just by one thing I can do. We have to look deeply into the causes and how can I address those. And sometimes we're going to have to, it's like if you want to help people who are suffering, you're going to have to bear that sometimes they're going to lash out at you. So you're going to have to take as part of your practice. Right? If we just say, I can't tolerate that, and we just leave the situation, if we go into it intentionally that way, we might have a different attitude of it. So you intentionally go to some country where people are very destitute with the intention of helping them. You just assume that when you get there, they're going to mistreat you because that's how it is there. But you never lose this motivation to help them to transform, but you recognize that it's going to take a long time and you have to address the causes of it. And so part of that is it's just natural that it's going to be that sometimes things explode and they cause harm to you. So we see that just in general in situations in life, that our ultimate goal is to help everybody, is to find solutions that will help everyone to overcome their problems, and thereby it's just natural that it's sometimes going to happen that the situation unfolds such that I get, because the short end of the stick. But rather than immediately trying to change it and saying immediately, this person, no, you can't talk that way to me, and this is a bad way to behave, it might not really help them, right? Sometimes it can be, if it's in the right time, in the right place. We have to recognize that when there's really an opportunity for that. But they have to be ready to hear that. We have to be skillful to know when that time is. And then it also, as I said before, it depends how we say it. And it's just because we're totally right, it doesn't mean that any way we say it is justified or is going to be helpful. You have to also know a very skillful way to express that they will come to see that, rather than they will just fight back. Yeah. Okay, and finally, may all this remain undefiled by the stains of the 8 mundane concerns. Right, so the point here, some of you might know the 8 mundane concerns, which means that you're seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, you're seeking gain, avoiding loss, you're seeking fame and avoiding disrepute, and you're seeking praise and not wanting to be blamed or criticized. But the point of that is essentially that it becomes just a selfish practice. You could then get this, anything can happen that way. So although you're practicing mind training, you start to get a sense of myself. I'm such a great practitioner because I'm practicing mind training. Right? Then it defeats itself, right? There are many examples of that in the history of Tibet, right? So, there's the story of Drupal Kungle. Some of you may have heard of this, of Bhutanese, actually. He was known for his unconventional behavior, and it said that one time he was walking around, I think the Barkor in Lhasa, as I understand, it was a holy site in Lhasa. And then he came upon somebody who was meditating very strongly, and he said, "What are you meditating on?" And the person said, "Patience." So, I'll say it in Tibetan. He said with him, "Well, hey, zopagong hingang kapasa." Right? So a little not so nice to say in English, but it basically meant, great patience meditator, why don't you eat shit? Right? So then the person stood up and started beating him away, and he said, and he just laughed and ran away. But he was pointing out something to him, right? That you're very attached to this idea that I'm a patience meditator, and when somebody challenges that, I want to fight back. Well, that's the exact opposite of the attitude you're trying to cultivate, right? So that's the point here. At the end, we look back on everything we're cultivating, and we're praying that doesn't happen, but it will happen. Of course, it's natural. Whatever we do, it's going to start to happen. That's why we say we try to be, as much as possible, keep our practice secret, because if we start advertising, I have this experience, I have these realizations, then it very quickly becomes a sense of ego about it, where then it prevents us from making further progress. So then it says, and may I, recognizing all things as illusions, devoid of clinging, be released from bondage. Right, so then the last part of it is seeing the ultimate reality of things. That situations in life that are unfolding, they're the results of deep causes and conditions that really, it's like an illusion. It's not as real and solid as it appears to us. Things appear to us to be very real and to exist in exactly the way they appear to us. Which it's not like that. It's not that it is an illusion. There's a little bit of a difference. An illusion is not even conventionally real. And so if there's an optical illusion, there's not really a horse in front of me. Whereas if there is a horse, but even if there is a horse, it's like an illusion. It's not that much more real. It's only real in a very conventional way, among worldly conventions. But when we analyze it, that's a totally different question about emptiness. But that's they say ultimate bodhicitta, right? This is the first verses are all about conventional bodhicitta, the practice of the awakening mind. But ultimately, we see it that way, and that's the ultimate way to overcome anger, is to be able to see that all things as manifestations of dependent arisings. That there's nothing to get angry at. There's no object of anger. So devoid of clinging means beyond not having this strong reification of situations as real and be released from bondage. So that is the goal, right? We're trying to achieve liberation. And so we're very fortunate if situations diminish our clinging. Again, in Shantideva, he talks about the different ways to deal with anger. One of them, he says, I'm somebody he's talking in the context of somebody is destroying my livelihood. They're stealing things from me. They're destroying my reputation. He says, what I am seeking liberation, and wealth and fame are obstacles to that. Because if the more I cling to them, the more I'll be bound in samsara. So when this person is destroying my obstacles, why should I be angry at them? Right? So we see this as we're so fortunate to be loosening our hold on things. In life, we're never going to get to a time when everything is just perfect. So we're going to have to accept that all that's going to happen in life is disappointment after disappointment. That's the nature of things. So if their behavior causes us to be a little bit less attached, a little bit more detached, a little bit more equanimous about things, that is beneficial for our progress.
Lamaji, suppose they're doing the same thing towards, let's say, a poor person or to an innocent animal.
Yes.
They're not doing it to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we think, what they're doing is wrong, and these people can't, respond, and they're suffering because of their bad actions.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps in that context, it wouldn't be right to keep silent. If they do it to us, maybe we can say, yes, for our benefit, it's loosening our attachments, and it's helping us become more patient.
Yeah.
But if they're doing it to someone innocent, like let's say a child or to a poor person or to a street dog or something, then surely we should respond in some way and not keep quiet.
As I've said before, we definitely should respond if there's something we can do that's skillful. Also, if they're hurting someone else, it's not impossible, but it's less likely that we will exaggerate the situation, right? So we'll be able to act more skillfully, more in a measured way, because it's not tied in with this sense of self and this exaggeration of they're just so bad. So like this example of Drupal Kunli and swearing at the person, and he gets up and hits him. Well, if he had sweared at someone else, it's unlikely the meditator would have stood up and hit him and said, "Don't talk to him that way." And he would have probably found a more reasonable way of dealing with it. But even so, it certainly can happen, especially if they're hurting somebody that we identify with. It's my child or it's my class of people, but it's generally the clinging is going to be less. But if it is somebody that we are attached to, and that we have to then be skillful to work with separate the reality of the situation and the skillful way we can react with our own exaggeration and our own story about how bad this is, and about not wanting, because our reputation is not as, we can, if somebody is actively committing physical violence, right, then there's really a potential for long-term harm. But if it's just about wanting to always appear good in front of other people, sometimes we just have to let go of that, and it's not as big of a deal as you might think. And probably it's more likely that we'll have a good reputation if we're seen as patient than if we just react by losing our temper. So I think it's been clear from everything I've said today that it's not a simple answer. This is something that you have to train in for a long time. But it's very good to familiarize with these ideas, and that it gradually permeates into our actions and our day-to-day thoughts, because we tend to train in the opposite. We tend to train in just again and again creating these same dramas in our minds about what's happening. And so we counter that a bit with the opposite. But as it says at the end, it's like an illusion, the point being that neither is really true. Right? So like if we're excessively attached to somebody in Buddhist practice, often we will meditate on the foulness of the body. So we see this person is very attractive and it's just tormenting our minds. We meditate on the fact that this person composed of elements that are unattractive. If we just had any of those in isolation, it wouldn't be attractive to us. We meditate on their getting old, and that this person who's very attractive now and sometime will gradually get less and less attractive. But it doesn't mean either is really true. They're not truly attractive. Depends on a lot of, like, for example, one dog is very attractive to another, but it's not attractive to us in that way. So it has to do a lot with our own perspective, but they're not ultimately unattractive either. Just that we're cultivating the opposite. So likewise here, right? It's not that I'm more important than everyone else. It's also not that I'm less important than everyone else. The point is just that if we have this excessive sense of self-importance, we counter that with the opposite, training and thinking the other way around. But ultimately, it's all just we have to keep this perspective that it's like a game. It's all just a way of training the mind. There's no ultimate reality to it. So that being said, it's 12:20 now. So we can finish maybe with a bit of meditation. So let's start just by sitting quietly again for a few minutes. Do some analytical meditation after that.
Okay, so now let's just do a little bit of analytical meditation. So, if possible, bring to mind an experience in your life that you've had, not something recent because there might be too much emotion involved, but think about something that happened some number of years ago where somebody mistreated you. They spoke abusive words, wrongly accused you, something like that. Try to bring that situation to mind and remember the details of what was going on. So when that's happening, we have a choice of how we can react. We're not powerless. So we can think, what's the first thing I can do? First thing is to become present with your own experience. How does this feel? Where do I feel it? It's good to have a strong bodily awareness here. Recognize how does it sense in my body? Otherwise, if we don't have awareness of that, that will control us. Then we can, within that space, have some gap. Sometimes we don't have to react immediately. We can think, where did this come from? How did this situation unfold? It may have unfolded over many years that it came to this point. And recognize that there were many causes. I played a part in this. They played a part in this. So not just wanting to change it right now, but seeing how can we move this in a more positive direction. This is not desirable. It's reached an impasse. Then we have some space in our minds. We can think, well, how did I react? Was it effective? If not, what might have been a more skillful way to manage that situation, having this greater perspective? We're very closed in the situation. It feels very claustrophobic. It seems like there's only one course we can take. We either react, or don't react. But is there a third possibility? Is there something else we could do?
when we have more space in our minds, we can see there might actually be another way to handle this more effective way. So with that perspective, that situation is gone. We can't change it now. But we can know that we recognize now with all this perspective many years later that there is something we could have done differently. It wasn't as solid as it appeared at the time. And then can we bring that wisdom into the future? This happens again. The situation will inevitably unfold again. What can I do now that this won't happen again? And what can I do differently if that does happen again? Okay. That's good for today, I think. Why don't we do some dedication prayers at the end? Page 36. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception to that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenri, Zik, Tenzin, Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. We also pray that the re-embodiment of Kebje Lama Zepa Rinpoche might be free of obstacles to continuing the work of the predecessor, manifest another life of enlightened activities, and that we also might play some part in that we might be connected with this person and benefit them and receive benefit from them and their teachings in the future. You never know what will happen, but we make the aspiration that might unfold in the most positive way without any obstacles. Okay. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.